Good morning. Welcome to Wake Up with Ashland. My name is Eric Brooks. I'm the curator here at Ashland, and it's great to have you with us again this morning, as always. We appreciate you tuning in, and I hope you're doing well. I want to take a moment to thank Dupree Mutual Funds for their kind support of our program. Well, we very much appreciate the fact that they've given us the opportunity to bring these to you over the last several months. So we are very pleased to have that opportunity and hope that you've enjoyed them over the last several months. Today this will be the last of these programs before our reopening next Tuesday. We're very pleased to be reopening and to have a variety of opportunities for you to partake of the estate. So if you're interested in that, just visit the website, henryclay.org, and you'll find on the website information about all of the tours we're offering and all the ways that you can enjoy and interact with Ashland in our new reopening. And you'll also find information about all the things that we're doing to make it as safe and comfortable as possible for all concerned. It's very, very important to us. So please take a look at that, and we'll hope to see you here soon. As Cameron mentioned last time, we're going to be going to a little different format in that she and I will be alternating on Thursdays starting next week. So we haven't really decided which of us is going to take next week, but we'll figure it out. You'll see one of us every Thursday morning, and it will be very similar things that we've done so far. So anyway, we look forward to seeing you and continuing to do this as part of our offerings going forward. So that said, today's artifact is really quite timely. Today, as I speak, our partners whom you met on Tuesday, the Kentucky Hempsters, Alyssa and Kirsten, are outside at our hemp plot, getting it prepared for tilling. It will be tilled here in a little while, and next week probably they will plant our hemp crop for the year. This is our 5th year planting the hemp crop. It's something we were very, very pleased to be able to do. I think it's a very, very important part of Ashland's story, and it was so gratifying to be able to bring that back after so many years and be able to be a place where you can come and see it, interact with it, and learn about it. So we hope you'll take that opportunity to do that in the coming weeks as it grows and hopefully flourishes. Hopefully we'll have a good season this year and have a very nice crop that we will probably harvest sometime around the beginning of October. We're a little later than some years getting started, but nonetheless, we think it'll be a very good crop, and we look forward to watching it grow and invite you to do that. And we'll post some things on the web as we go. So today, I'm going to talk about hemp at Ashland, but I'm going to do it through Henry Clay's own words. And we're going to look at an artifact in which he tells us about what he did, and we're going to talk about that, how the crop has grown, what he did with it, the things he discovered. So let's take a look at this artifact. Hopefully get up without killing myself here. Come over here. Turn the camera around. This is an agricultural textbook called the Farmer's School Book. This book was printed in 1837. This is interesting in a variety of ways. Up until this time, agriculture was something that sons learned from fathers or apprentices learned from people who had been doing it a long time. But by this time, many began to think that it was time for farming to become an academic subject, that it could be taught in schools, and in so doing, it would make for better farmers, better educated farmers, farmers educated in the latest techniques, and all of the science that went into farming. And so this is a book that was produced for that purpose. I don't know how many of these were produced or how widely it was used, but it was used around the country. This, I think, was produced in Albany, New York. So it's got chapters on all sorts of different kinds of agricultural subjects. We come in here. You got chapters on chemistry, calorie, oxygen, nitrogen, atmosphere, carbon light, all the different things that affect farming, different kinds of farming, pasturage, some livestock. Come over here, sorry. Etc. So there's just all sorts of different things in the book. But the part that's important to us is chapter number 12. This chapter is on hemp. I believe this is online. I will make sure it is later today, but I'm pretty sure it's already there, so you can read this if you wish. This particular chapter was written by Henry Clay, and that's important for a variety of reasons. It tells us how respected Clay was as a farmer, that people felt that his skills and knowledge were good enough, important enough, that they should be shared, that he was someone that could be looked at as an authority. It also probably is the case that the man who produced this book figured, if I have a chapter by Henry Clay, it's going to sell better. People are going to want to buy a book just because it has information by Henry Clay. And it's about a 12 or 13 page chapter, which goes into great detail about hemp at Ashland. So I'm going to come back over here now. We're going to talk about what this chapter actually says. I have some props. So Clay talks about growing hemp at Ashland, and he tells us that there's not a lot of prep work needed, for your field, that you don't have to do a lot of things to get it ready, just clear it. And generally speaking, you can plant as early as April, although in Kentucky it's often frosty or cold, so it's better to wait until at least the middle of May. You can continue to plant right up until, probably in the middle of June or so, as we are. So there's a pretty good window there for planting. He talks about the fact that you can plant seed in two ways. This is hemp seed right here. This seed I've had for a while, and he says in the article that seed that is more than a year old or that is not from the previous growing year is probably not going to be viable, or at least not as viable as seed used as the fresher, newer seed. So you don't want it to sit on your shelf for several years. You want to use it up. And when he planted seed, he would plant two crops, essentially, or two sections. He would plant a smaller section of plants that were planted in a way to produce more seed. And there were several steps that included: thinning out some of the male plants to make more room for female plants, which would produce the seed. Then he had separate plots where he was planting for his primary use, which was fiber. So he would plant his plants in the two separate plots in order to create seed for the next year and to have fiber, which is what he actually was harvesting and producing goods with. So that's the hemp seed. And he tells us that once it's planted, you don't have to do much to it. During the growing season, and we found this to be true here, maybe an occasional inspection or a little weeding, but generally hemp is a very easy crop. There's very little that you have to do to the plot in order to create the best crop. It's not like some crops which require lots and lots of fertilizer or pesticides or other things. And in fact, that's one of the benefits of it today, as opposed to, say, cotton, which requires many pounds of fertilizer and pesticide, which have negative effects on the environment. Hemp really doesn't. So once it's planted, it grows through the season, and usually in the early fall, sometime perhaps as early as mid-September or into October, the hemp is harvested. This is a picture of a hemp harvest. Now, this is using a piece of mechanical equipment. I'm not sure that was used in Henry Clay's time. In fact, he says in his book that it was typically done by hand and that there were two ways of doing it. You could pull it up by the root, or you could come along with a knife, usually a broken scythe or scythe shape, so a curved heavy blade, and cut it a couple of inches off the ground. And either way, it was pretty effective. Pulling it up by the roots would probably make the soil a little easier to work with the next year, less tilling and whatnot, but nonetheless, it could be harvested in either fashion that you wished. That obviously would take some time in some of these very large plots. And then the next step is to shock it, and it is shocked. Usually, Clay says that his harvest was shocked into small hand-sized bundles, and then those hand-sized bundles were stacked into a larger shock like that. We actually had a shock in the field until this morning. I think the hempsters have now moved it and put it in the smokehouse. So you can see that shock there. That shock's been sitting a good while. And this is a whole field full of shocks. You can see this. These have all been stacked in these little shocks, just like this. And it stays stacked in that for a little while. Now, Clay says in his chapter that generally speaking, a month or two later, you undo the shocks. But he has also had fields where he shocked the hemp and left it for as much as a year before unshocking it. And sometimes that has benefits in terms of color and quality of the fiber extracted. So there are multiple ways. And one of the important things that we learned from the hemp chapter that Clay wrote is that he's willing to do lots of different things. In fact, Clay seemed to enjoy the whole process of agricultural experimentation. It was something that he was fascinated by and that he felt he could make and grow better crops by doing. And he was very happy to do it. And there was never really a bad result. Some might say, well, if it didn't work, that's a bad result. Well, it's not. For Clay, if it didn't work, it didn't work. That's an important piece of information. And so that was okay. And he was all right with that. So, that's a way to go, a thing to know. After it is shocked, again, sits for a little while in a shock, it then has to be rotted. And there are two ways to do that. Most often, Clay used a method where it's what's called dew rotting, where it is taken out of the shocks and laid flat on the ground in a single layer. And it sits there for a couple of months generally, and rain, dew, and frost gather on it. That moisture helps the fiber to separate from the inner woody husk, so it can be more easily processed and removed. The other way to do it, and Clay actually did this, is called water rotting. Much of the hemp from Europe was water rotted, and so he wanted to try it to see if it made a huge difference. It was more challenging for a variety of reasons, not least of which is that you had to build vats to do this. And his vats were 50 feet long, 12 feet wide at the top, 14 feet wide at the bottom, and 4 feet deep. That's a big, big vat. That's quite a few feet across, quite a few cubic feet of space to fill with water. And if you had a really dry year, it could be very difficult to do that. Clay also had to move water to do this. He dug a canal on his property about a quarter mile in length to bring water from its source, perhaps the Clay Spring, which is located along the edge of the Shriners Hospital property over on Clay Spring Road, over to his hemp vats. And we aren't sure where they were. But he tried it, and I don't think the results were such that he concluded that he could recommend it as the definitely superior method, but it was a way to go. Typically, you would fill it up with water, put the hemp in it, and it would sit, for no more than several days, I think, and then the hemp was extracted. So it takes less time in terms of putting it in the vat, but there's a lot more effort that is required. The next step is breaking. This is a hemp break. You can see this gentleman here. He is breaking hemp. That is a very stereotypical break. They were typically made out of oak or some other very heavy, hard wood. And you lift this top piece here up and bring it down on the hemp to break up the hemp, to separate fiber from chaff. This was a very, very laborious process. It could be very detrimental to health. Oftentimes, this process resulted in a lot of particulate matter that could be inhaled, causing a condition called white lung, which is similar to black lung. So it was a very nasty job to do. And this was typically done in February and March, so it was very cold. One of the things that was done to deal with the cold and to improve the yield of fiber was that, generally speaking, next to the hemp break, the person breaking the hemp would build a fire. And that fire served to warm the person as well as to warm and dry the hemp. So I don't see a fire in this picture, but that was usually how it was done. And the result is this product. You can see these large bales of fiber. And that's what Clay was trying to create. And it was used for a variety of purposes. So this is the woody part of the plant. And I want to thank the hempsters. They gave me all these bottles with this handy material in it. That's what's left over. Today, this is being used for things like pet bedding, bedding in stables and stalls, etc. So there are many people working on ways to use this part of the plant, which is left over when the fiber is removed. This is unprocessed raw hemp fiber. You can see at the bottom, that's kind of what it looks like right off the plant. And this has been combed a little bit. It almost looks cottony. It's very soft fiber, makes very fine clothing and other products. So that's hemp fiber. And what did Clay do with this fiber? Well, mainly he made rope. And that was done at rope walks. And there were a number of rope walks in Lexington. Clay actually owned stakes in some. And there was one at one time right across from Ashland on the other side of Richmond Road. That is actually a hemp rope. I got that rope at Shaker Village. Thank you, Shaker Village, for making that rope. And they did a very, very short hemp walk to make that. Typically, the hemp walk has to be at least as long as the rope you're making. So if you want 100 foot of rope, you have to have a 100-foot walk to do that. And that was done by twisting, using a cranking device to make the rope. Clay also had his hemp made into rope and bagging for the cotton industry and sails for ships, rope for ships. This stuff is very water resistant. It doesn't rot. Very high quality rope. So it was used frequently in naval applications. Now, something you may notice when you look at these pictures is that all of the people doing this work are African American. These pictures come from a book by a man named James F. Hopkins, who later edited the Henry Clay Papers. This book is available. It's a history of hemp in Kentucky, and you can usually find it in libraries. The Lexington Public Library probably has copies. I know UK and Transy do. So if you want to see it, you can see it there. You can probably also you might well find digital copies online. It's now out of print. But that labor was all done by African Americans, and this is in the early 20th century. So these people probably were paid, although probably not much. So they're still doing this difficult work. Now, in Clay's time, that work was done by enslaved African Americans, and we've talked about some of the things that went into that. That it was done in March or February when it was cold. And these people often had very little protective clothing. They didn't have heavy coats or gloves or those sorts of things. So the best they could hope for was that the fire might keep them a little bit warm. And it was something they would do from generally dawn to dusk. And they were expected to do a great deal of it. This is a grid from one of Henry Clay's farm journals. There are two. We have one here. Move my mail. That is our farm journal. That's mostly livestock. I'll do that one sometime. This one is at UK Special Collections, and it contains a large section of records on hemp processing at Ashland, which are quite fascinating. And you see these names like Jim, Frank, Buck, William, Stepney, Matt. Going down here, some similar names. There's Todd and Watkins and Lewis. If you look at the numbers, these are the numbers of pounds of hemp that they're processing on a given day. It's 104 pounds of hemp in a day. And if you come to Ashland, you can see the shock and you can actually handle it. And you'll find out that that's a heck of a lot of hemp to process right there. That just requires immense labor. And that's just an incredible amount of work to do. You'll also notice if you come down here, task 100 pounds. So these people are expected to produce that, and most of them did. There were a few who didn't. Out here, Lewis misses the mark here. And if you come back up here, you can see later on, we aren't seeing some of those folks. Well, what happened to them? That's a good question. Well, he comes back here. Sometimes, if you missed your mark, and you did it, especially if it happened a lot, you might be put on another task, or you might be sold. So there could be serious consequences. You might even be punished physically with things like whipping. So it was not only hard work, there were real consequences if you didn't accomplish what was set out before you. Clay did, and in some cases, if the task was set at a certain weight, say in this case 100 pounds, let's say Buck here produced 109, he might be able to get paid for the 9 pounds over the task that he produced. And in this way, these folks could earn money to enhance their living quarters, buy better food, or even save up to eventually purchase their freedom or that of a loved one. And that was very, very important money. It was a very difficult thing for enslaved people to do. So they prized that highly and worked very hard to protect the earnings they might make in these particular activities. So these people, if you look at over time, some of these people did this for many, many years. It took a real toll on their bodies. There's the physical labor of lifting the hemp brake up and down and breaking all of that hemp, plus all the inhaling the particulate matter. This could be really, really difficult, really, really hard, brutal work. And by the time they were even what we would consider probably middle-aged, they were physically what we would consider probably old age. So it took a real toll on the people who did it. And it's really great that we have the records so that we can have their names and read their names and remember that they were here and ensure that that survives. It's really great that we have all of these records, the hemp chapter, etc. It tells us a lot about how hemp was processed here, and like I say, exactly how much Clay was willing to experiment, how involved he was in trying to improve the process. He tried a variety of different strains of hemp. He tried a variety of experimental breaks. That's all in the chapter. And of course, we've talked about the different rotting techniques, growing techniques. It's just abundantly clear that Henry Clay was very willing to experiment and to do everything he could to improve the growing of hemp, not only for himself, but for people all over the country and for all over his state. One other statement that is in this chapter, and we've talked about slavery already, that Clay makes a note that there are states around him, particularly north of the Ohio, where they might have better water or flatter land. But he says that Kentucky has one thing they don't, and that is a ready supply of enslaved labor. So that puts us in a position to succeed. And it was one of the reasons, certainly maybe the main reason, that we became the primary state for hemp production in the United States during Clay's time. And it's very important that we remember that the wealth Clay enjoyed from hemp, and that all the hemp growers that produced it enjoyed, and all the people who enjoyed money that came from the hemp growers came from the sweat and blood of the enslaved who produced it. Are there any questions? I'd be happy to answer any questions there might be. Like I say, we're plowing the field today. We'll plant next week. So in very short order, you can come watch our hemp grow. It's fun to come check it every couple of weeks. It goes pretty fast. And Elaine, you're quite right. The numbers that were set were very high. I mean, Clay wanted to make as much money as he could, and so he produced a lot of hemp. And there were times when the market might be not what he wanted it to be, so he would set goals even higher. The goals were based on what Clay wanted to make in terms of money, not in terms of what might be reasonable for a person to do. So it's very true. They were very high goals, and they did require very long, hard, dirty, dusty days. Wood asks about growing cannabis. Well, hemp is cannabis sativa. Clay did not grow cannabis sativa, the kind that we call marijuana. That was not grown here. Don't think was grown widely in general in that time period. So no. I do think Clay grew a very small amount of tobacco for personal use, but he was never a producer of tobacco for commercial use. Well, again, we hope you'll come out and check out our hemp plot. We'll look forward to seeing you next week as we begin more tours and getting back to more operating. And we'll hope to see you at our tours. Thank you for enjoying our series, and we'll hope to see you next Thursday and in future Thursdays. Thank you very much for watching. Have a good day and a good weekend.